I am Mara Voss, logistics technician. Third grade assigned to the Alliance. Vessel Steadfast Reach. My job is to make sure bolts go where bolts are supposed to go, that fuel cells reach the right deck before the right shift, and that nobody runs out of anything important during a crisis. I am very good at my job. Nobody knows this yet. That is also by design. The Steadfast Reach carries a crew of 411. Humans make up maybe 60 of that number. The rest are Cathari, Voreth, and a small delegation of Palasi engineers who mostly keep to themselves and communicate in frequencies I cannot hear. The Cathari run the ships. Administration, cold, precise, deeply obsessed with classification. They have a word for everything and a rank for everyone. The Voreth runs ship security and combat operations. They are large, they are loud, and they find humans somewhere between baffling and mildly offensive. The feeling is mutual, though humans are polite enough to keep that to themselves, usually. I share my logistics bay with a Cathari data analyst named Sesver and a human engineer named Dale Cooper who hums to himself when he works and has never once in 3 years noticed that it drives everyone near him to the edge of reason. Sesver does not hum. Sesver does not do anything without filing a form first. I respect this. About him, we have an understanding. My corner of the bay is small. 1 terminal, 1 chair, 1 shelf with a photograph I keep face down, and a coffee maker that has been with me since before I can politely discuss. The coffee maker is the oldest thing I own. It makes terrible coffee. I would sooner walk out an airlock than leave it behind. On the morning this story really starts, I was eating a sandwich and watching Sesver run crew threat assessments. He does this every month. Alliance protocol. Every crew member gets a profile score that tells command how dangerous they are, how stable what their combat value is in an emergency. It is a deeply Cathari system. They love knowing where everything sits in a hierarchy. Humans find it slightly insulting. The Voreth find it insufficient. The Palasi have never responded to it at all. Sesver works methodically. He starts with the Cathari profiles, which always resolve in seconds. Clean data, clean outputs. The Voreth take longer because their combat metrics require additional fields, but they resolve too. Solid numbers, high threat ratings, exactly what command expects. The humans come back moderate as always, not threatening enough to concern anyone, not useless enough to dismiss. Then Sesver gets to me. I know when it happens because he stops. He does not stop for anything. He processes data the way breathing works. For most people, continuous and without drama. He stops and he leans forward. And he reads his screen for a very long time. I eat my sandwich. Voss, he says in the flat, precise way the Cathari pronounce human names, like every syllable is being measured before being allowed out. Yep. Your classification is pending. I know. He turns to look at me. The Cathari have 4 eyes, 2 primary and 2 secondary, and when all 4 focus on you simultaneously, it feels like being audited. It has been pending for 2,247 days. I put in a ticket. I say, they closed it. The system cannot generate an output for your profile. Short, okay. This is not a normal error condition. I look at him, he looks at me. All 4 Eyes doing their audit thing, I offer him half my sandwich because it seemed like the right move. He declines, which was expected, and turns back to his screen, which was also expected. He files it as a software bug. I watch him do it. I finish my sandwich. I go back to my manifest. 18 supply crates needed. Redistribution before second shift. Because someone in Deck 7 had logged a refrigeration unit under miscellaneous hardware, and it had been sitting in the wrong section for 4 days, slowly making the surrounding equipment smell like overripe fruit. This is the kind of problem I solve. This is what I do. I am very good at it. Somewhere in the Alliance database, an algorithm has been trying to decide what I am for 6 years and keeps returning a loading symbol, and I find this honestly a little funny. Not funny enough to explain it. The caravan engagement is in my file, sealed under a classification level that requires 3 separate authorizations. To access, my survival is logged as administrative oversight. Someone, somewhere at some point decided that what happened at Carav was easier to file than to understand, and I was easier to lose in a logistics bay than to look at directly. I have been pending since Carav. I know what happened at Carav. I just do not talk about it. There's a photograph on my shelf that I keep face down. It was taken 14 months before the engagement at a base celebration I barely remember attending. Everyone in it is smiling. I am in the far right corner, slightly out of frame, holding a cup of terrible coffee. 300 people went home from Carav. 4,000 did not. I am the only one who knows the specific order in which the systems failed. Because I was the one watching them, I know the timing, I know the sequence. I know it the way you know a nightmare you have had so many times it has stopped being frightening and started being furniture, something that is simply there when you open your eyes. Says Voris, still staring at his screen. When I pack up at end of shift, the error will not close, he says, not looking at me. Put in another ticket, I say. He says nothing. I take my coffee from the maker, lock my terminal, and walk back to my quarters through corridors that smell like recycled air and engine coolant. 2 Vors pass me in the hall. They snorts do not acknowledge me. I do not acknowledge them. This is how most of my days go. Fine snorts by me. The trick to being invisible is not hiding. Hiding draws attention. You hide when you have something to hide, and people feel that. They sense the effort of it. The trick is simply to be present in exactly the way the situation expects. Logistics technician 3rd grade, moving through a ship, going about the work. Nothing to see, nothing to classify. I have been doing this for 6 years. I am very good at this too. I get back to my quarters and I stand at my desk for a moment, looking at the face-down photograph without picking it up. Then I make another cup of terrible coffee and I sit down and I open my personal log, the one that is not in any fleet system, and I write one line. The algorithm tried again today. I close the log. I go to sleep. The loading symbol keeps spinning. Somewhere in the fleet database, patient as anything, waiting for a category that does not exist yet. The ambush hit on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because I just finished logging a refrigeration manifest, and Tuesdays are when the cold storage inventory comes due, and I remember thinking, very briefly, that I was going to have to refile the whole thing if the ship took significant Structural damage because the auto-sync would revert to the last checkpoint and 3 hours of careful data entry would disappear. That was the first thought I had when the ship shook hard enough to knock Dale's humming straight out of him. The second thought was that this was not a standard collision. Standard collisions feel like being bumped hard, yes, but directional. One impact, one source. This felt like the ship was being grabbed and compressed by something with patience, multiple points of contact spreading pressure. The kind of hit that does not stop. Shriven. Dale was already at his panel. Sesfer was perfectly still, which with Cathari means something very different from calm. Every alert in the logistics bay lit red at once, which is not actually an alert color in our system. Red means the alert system itself is damaged. I pulled up the ship's main diagnostic feed without being asked by anyone because nobody was going to ask me, and because I needed to know the shape of it. The shape of it was not good. The steadfast reach had taken 3 simultaneous hits to report side 1 to the primary power conduit junction, and something had gone wrong with the combat AI that was above my clearance level to fully understand, but very easy to identify by its symptoms. The system was looping. Power allocation request from weapons. Array power allocation request from emergency shielding, same source load. Competing priority flags, and the A spinning between them, unable to choose. Weapons would get power, shielding would drop, the AI would panic and reverse it. Weapons would drop, shielding would come back and around while the Shriven were doing whatever Shriven do. When a ship is standing still in space, with its systems chasing their own tails. I looked at the loop for maybe 4 seconds. Then I rerouted. It was not the textbook solution. The textbook solution is a priority override at command level, which requires a command officer, and the command deck was not answering the internal channel because I would find out later they were somewhat occupied. What I did instead was pull the power allocation for the mess hall climate system, the secondary crew recreation bay, and the entire deck 6 lighting grid, pull that load and use it to run both weapons and shielding at reduced but functional capacity simultaneously, which the AI had not considered because the AI is not programmed to turn off the lights in the cafeteria during a combat engagement. I mean, I was not programmed to do that specifically, but I grew up in a house where the electricity bill was a monthly crisis, and you learned very quickly which things you could turn off and which things you absolutely could not. Some skills do not look like skills until the moment they do. The loop broke in 11 seconds. The weapons array fired, the shields held, the ship stopped being still. I kept going. The combat AI was functional now, but damaged, running at maybe 60% confidence. On its decision trees, I could see it hesitating on tactical calls, taking a fraction too long on each choice, and in a Shriven engagement, a fraction is the whole story. I could not fix the AI. That was above my clearance and also genuinely beyond my technical knowledge. But I could watch what it was slow on and route around it. Escape vector calculations depend on knowing which corridors are passable and which are compromised. That is a logistics function. I had the full ship manifest open already. I started flagging viable paths before the AI got to them. Medical triage priority depends on knowing which medical bays have functioning equipment and which have lost power. Also a logistics function. I cross-referenced the power reroutes I had already run with the medical bay inventory logs and sent the updated priority list to the medical deck without anyone asking me to. The Voreth battle captain, whose name is Rithvor and who I had spoken to maybe twice in a year and a half, both times, about supply manifests he had signed, incorrectly appeared at the logistics bay entrance at some point during all of this. I did not notice him immediately. I was working. When I did notice him, he was standing very still, watching me work with an expression I did not have a reference for. The Voreth have a lot of expressions for combat states, aggression, readiness, dominance, challenge. This was not any of those. It was something quieter. I did not have time to think about it. The Shriven pulled back 40 minutes later. We were intact, damaged, yes, the port side was going to need 2 weeks of work. And the Deck 6 lighting situation was going to confuse people until someone thought to look at why, but we were intact, 411 crew all present. Rithvor filed his after-action report. I saw the word he used for me in the fleet summary the next morning when Sesver read it aloud with the careful precision of someone who wants to be very sure they are pronouncing a word correctly because it is important. The word was aberrant. I looked it up. Deviating from the expected, outside the normal range. Sure, okay. I filed my own after-action report. 3 supply crates damaged beyond repair, 2 personnel assignments recommended for redistribution based on demonstrated emergency performance. 1 coffee maker, undamaged, confirmed. Operational, located on shelf. Logistics bay accounted for and present. Dale read my report over my shoulder and said nothing for a while. Then he said, "You saved the ship." "I rerouted some power," I said. "Myra." The AI was stuck. "Myra, you ran tactical operations from a logistics terminal." "I just work here," I said. He started humming again. I think it was his way of processing things he did not have other words for. I let him. Some people need noise. I have never been one of them. The coffee maker sat on its shelf, warm and terrible, and accounted for. I drank a cup and went back to the refrigeration manifest. It needed refiling after all. The auto sync had reverted exactly as I predicted, and 3 hours of data entry had vanished into the ether. I started again. From the top, this is the work you do. The work, you do it again if the work gets broken. Somewhere in the fleet database, Vor's report was being read by people I had never met. I did not think about that. I just typed. Sesver is the kind of person who cannot leave an error alone. Most people can. Most people file the ticket, wait for the system to sort itself and move on to things that are actually their problem. Sesver is not most people. He is Cathari. They do not have a cultural concept for leaving something unclassified. It sits in their mind the way a splinter sits in a thumb, present, insistent, asking to be addressed. He had been asking to be addressed for 6 years without resolution, and then came the engagement, and then came Rithvor's report with the word aberrant in it, and something in Sesver clicked into a gear I had not seen him use before. He pulled my full military record. He told me this himself later, in the flat and precise way he tells me most Things sitting across from me in the logistics bay with his 4 eyes, arranged in the expression I have come to understand means he is being careful. He said he had intended only to review the standard service history. He said it became apparent within the first few minutes that the standard service history was not the whole picture. It was not. The care of engagement is listed in my file. It has to be. You cannot simply remove an engagement from a service record without leaving a shape where it used to be, a gap that is more obvious than the thing you were trying to hide. So it is there. Date, location, classification level. 4,000 personnel, 1 survivor. Engagement outcome, classified survivor. Status, administrative note. Administrative note. That is what I am in the official record. Of 4,000 people going quiet in the space of 6 hours, a note, a clerical entry. Something someone had to add because living person creates paperwork that a system cannot simply ignore. No matter how much easier it would be if it could. Chesvor read the note. Then he tried to access the engagement. Details. 3 separate authorizations required. He does not have 3 separate authorizations. He has 1, maybe 1.5 if you count his secondary clearance, which technically he should not use for personal research inquiries, but which he used anyway because he is, and there was an unclassified error in his data. And this apparently justifies certain liberties. He got the engagement summary, not the full record, the summary. He told me later that he read it twice and then sat still for a while. I believe him. I have read it myself. It is not an easy document to move through quickly. But here is the thing about classified records. They are very good at hiding what happened. They are very bad at hiding what was moved, what was allocated, what was requested and fulfilled and logged in triplicate. Because supply chains do not stop for emergencies and someone always has to sign for the fuel cells, the supply logs from Carif are not classified. Nobody classifies supply logs. They are the most boring documents in any military operation. Who requested what, when it arrived, where it went, how much was used, what was left over. Page after page of numbers and item codes and destination stamps, the unsexy infrastructure of everything that actually keeps a fighting force alive. Generals do not read supply logs. Historians do not cite supply logs. The people who write threat assessment algorithms do not build their parameters around supply logs. SCS-4 is not a general or a historian. He is a data analyst with an unresolved classification error and 6 years of professional frustration and a secondary clearance he is technically not supposed to use for personal inquiries. He read the KREV supply logs. He read them for 3 hours. He told me that somewhere in the second hour he stopped reading like an analyst and started reading like someone who had been given a document and only slowly understood what kind of document it was. He said the closest comparison in Cathar experience was finding a record of a battle that had been won but filed as a loss and not understanding why, until you traced every single movement and realized the person who won it had signed their name in the supply column, not the command column, because that was the only column they were allowed to use. At KREV in 6 hours under active bombardment with 0 combat authorization with no surviving command officers after hour 1 A logistics technician, third grade, named Mara Voss had done the following. She rerouted power to 17 failing systems, using supply chain redundancies that were not designed for that purpose and should not have functioned and did. She coordinated 3 simultaneous evacuations by repurposing the catering delivery schedule as a movement template. Because the catering schedule was the only ship-wide time system still running with reliable data, she held a defensive perimeter on 3 separate decks, not by fighting but by predicting. She cross-referenced the incoming attack patterns against the inventory manifests for each deck and identify which areas the Shriven prioritized based on what was stored. There she moved people out of those areas before the attacks came. She was right every time. She kept 300 people alive for 6 hours in a glassed engagement with nothing but a logistics terminal and the knowledge of exactly where everything was. The combat-rated officers were gone in hour 1. 300 people came home. She filed an after-action supply report before the rescue vessels arrived, 11 pages itemized. Sesfer's classification attempt did not return a low score when he entered this data. It did not return an error. It returned something he had not seen the system generate before. Category does not exist. Create new. He stared at that prompt for a long time. He told me he sat with it through his meal break and into the next shift, and by the time he finally looked up from his screen, Dale was gone and the bay was quiet, and I had apparently walked past him twice without him noticing, which he said was disorienting because he notices everything. I find that easy to believe, I told him. He looked at me with all 4 eyes in the careful arrangement. You were there. Yes. You knew where everyone was. I had the manifests. The manifests do not tell you to route evacuations through the catering schedule. The catering schedule was the only timestamp system with reliable location data. It was the obvious choice. It was not obvious, he said. Nothing about what you did was obvious. I looked at him, he looked at me. I thought about the photograph on my shelf that I keep face down. I thought about 11 pages of itemized supply data filed before the rescue ships arrived, because the work does not stop and someone has to sign for what was used and what was left and what was lost. I just work here, I said. He did not look satisfied with this answer. He looked, if anything, like a person who had reached into a drawer for something routine and found something that rearranged his understanding of drawers entirely. He went back to his screen. Create new. The cursor blinked. He did not click yes. Not yet, he told me later. He needed to think about what to name it first, and that naming things incorrectly is, to a Cathar, a serious matter. I respected that. I went back to my manifest. The coffee maker on the shelf behind me hummed softly to itself. I had brought it from Kiev in a supply crate that I logged as miscellaneous kitchen equipment, which was technically accurate and no one had ever questioned it, which was also technically how I preferred things. The Vorith do not ask for help. This is not pride exactly, though it looks like pride from the outside. It is more structural than that. The Vorith understand the universe as a system of hierarchies, and every hierarchy requires everyone inside it to occupy their correct position. A Vorith battle captain sits at the top of the ship's combat hierarchy to ask for help from someone outside that hierarchy is not weakness, It is an error, a category. Violation. It implies the hierarchy was wrong in the first place, which means every decision built on that hierarchy becomes suspect, which means the whole structure of how things are supposed to work starts to loosen, and the Vorath have strong feelings about loosening structures. Rethvor sent me a formal request. Anyway, it came through the standard interdepartment channel, routed as a personnel advisory, which is the least alarming category available in the fleet communication system and the one least likely to generate gossip. Before I had a chance to read it, that was deliberate. He thought about how to send it. I could tell because of Vorath battle. Captain sending a routine personnel advisory to a logistics technician third grade is not something that happens in nature, and the deliberateness of the category choice was the only thing that kept Dale from reading it over my shoulder. The message said that my presence on the command deck during the next engagement would be a strategic asset. Not requested, not commanded, a strategic asset. I read it twice, then I looked at the coffee maker for a moment. Sure, okay, I said to no one in particular. Dale looked up from his panel. What? Nothing, I said, back to work. I sent Rethvor a one-line confirmation and asked if there was seating on the command deck because my lower back had been doing something unpleasant since I slept at a bad angle 3 days ago, and standing for an extended engagement was not appealing. He responded in 4 minutes with confirmation that a seat would be provided. I thought about what it meant that he responded in 4 minutes to a question about seating. I filed it away and did not think about it again. The second engagement came 9 days later. The Shriven do not wait. This is one of the first things you learn about them, and one of the things that makes them genuinely frightening in a way that statistics and briefing documents do not fully capture. Other opponents wait, they regroup, they assess, they allow time to pass between actions. The Shriven think in formations, not in individuals, and formations do not need rest. They found us again 3 sectors from where the first engagement had occurred, and the alert hit on a Thursday at 400, which is the worst possible time for a ship's crew because it is the deepest part of the sleep cycle and the body does not come back to full function quickly. I was awake already. I am always awake at 400. This has been true since Karev. I do not sleep well in the deep hours, and I have made my peace with this. I had my terminal up and the diagnostic feed open before the general alert finished sounding. The command deck is at the center of the ship, 5 levels above logistics. I had never been there in 18 months aboard the Steadfast Reach. Most of the crew never go to the command deck. There is no reason to unless your function places you there. Mine had not until now. I walked through corridors moving with crew going the other direction, everyone with a direction and a purpose, the ship reorganizing itself around a threat, the way a living thing reorganizes around an injury. 2 Vorath passed me moving fast, armor partially assembled, and did not look at me. I went the other way, up 5 levels, and through a door that required Rethvor's authorization to open. He was standing at the main console. He looked at me when I entered and said nothing, which I respected, and gestured to the chair that had been positioned to the right of the primary tactical display, which was already showing the Shriven approach pattern. I sat down. I looked at the display. Everyone on the command deck was doing something, moving, checking, coordinating, and I registered that. Several of them looked at me briefly and then looked away in the manner of people who have been told a thing is happening and have decided to accept it without requiring further explanation. This was fine. I opened my logistics feed alongside the tactical display and began the process of understanding the shape of what was coming. Supply lines, system load levels, which decks were at full capacity, which were running with reduced crew due to the early hour, where the medical bays were in terms of readiness, where the power reserve sat. The Shriven formation came into full resolution on the display. I stopped. The formation is not something with a common name in Alliance tactical literature. The Alliance encountered it only once before and named it in their records after the location, which means it is filed as the KRF formation by the analysts who bothered to study it, and it is flagged as highly effective with no known counter because the one time it was used there were no surviving command officers to file a counter analysis. There was only a logistics report, 11 pages itemized. The Shriven lead with supply disruption. That is the core of it. They do not hit your weapons first, they hit the lines that feed your weapons, they hit the paths along which your repairs travel, the corridors your damage control crews need to move through, the power routes that keep your systems talking to each other. They do not destroy your capacity to fight. They starve it, and then when the starvation has done enough, when the ship is fighting on reserves and improvisation and increasingly bad decisions made by people who have been awake for too long and are running out of options, then they apply pressure. At Kar-Ev, that sequence took 6 hours. I had watched it happen in the system logs because the audio had gone out earlier and I needed to know when to stop moving. I counted them in the inventory data because every person on a ship creates a record of resource usage, meals logged, bunk assignments updated, medical bay check-ins, and when those records stop updating, you know what it means. I watched 4,000 records go quiet in the order the formation demanded. I knew the order. I was sitting on a supply crate under a Deck 3 storage rack and I was watching the order in which the Shriven would proceed, and I understood it the way you understand a thing that is happening to you in real time with nowhere to go and nothing to do, but understand it completely. I was not sitting on a supply crate now. 3 seconds passed. Rithvor did not speak. Nobody spoke. Command deck held a particular quality of silence that I recognized. The silence of people who are waiting for a decision and trying not to let the waiting become its own kind of noise. Something shifted inside my chest, not panic older than panic, the thing that lives underneath panic, the thing that was there before I learned what panic was and will be there after, the specific cold clarity of a system under pressure that has nothing left to waste. On fear, it is not a nice feeling, it is an accurate one. I reach for the thing I always reach. For in that clarity, the anger sweet and familiar, worn smooth from use. Tool that fits the hand exactly because the hand has held it so many times, not hot anger, not the kind that clouds, the kind that focuses, the kind that knows exactly what it is for. It came. I started talking. The counter to the Karath formation is not a combat solution. That is why the Alliance does not have one filed. They were looking for a way to fight it. The way through it is not a fight. It is a supply problem. You identify every resource line the formation is designed to disrupt, and you reroute those lines. Before the disruption reaches them, you move things before the Shriven arrive. Where the things are supposed to be, you do not give the formation what it is looking for, which is a predictable supply chain. You make the ship's logistics deliberately chaotic in a pattern that looks like confusion from the outside and is actually a different order entirely. An order only possible to maintain if one person holds the complete picture of the ship's resources in their head at once. I held the complete picture of the ship's resources in my head. I have done this for 6 years. It is my job. I began rerouting. I was talking while I worked, not explaining. There was no time to explain, just issuing the redirects as I identified them and trusting the crew to execute. Power reserve 3 to medical. Rather than weapons hold, cargo corridor 7 as secondary crew movement path. Cold storage units 12 through 15 cleared and reclassified as emergency equipment. Staging. Deck 4 refrigeration offline and its power load transferred to the shielding. Redundancy. The crew executed. Rithvor watched me. The engagement lasted 90 minutes. 90 minutes is not a short engagement. It felt from inside it like something much longer and something much shorter. Simultaneously, the strange time collapse of complete concentration where thinking stops and only doing remains. The Shriven formation broke in the 73rd minute, not because we outfought it, because it could not find what it was looking for. The lines were not where the formation expected lines to be. The starvation sequence had nothing to starve. The formation assumed a predictable supply chain and found an organism that had moved everything it needed to survive. Before the cutting started, the Shriven withdrew. Silence on the command deck. A different kind of silence from before. This one had a quality I associated with moments after something large and heavy fell somewhere nearby, and all the air had gone briefly elsewhere. Rithvor stepped back from the main console. In Vorath culture, this gesture has a specific meaning. I learned this afterward when Sesver explained it to me with the careful expression he uses when he wants to be sure I understand the weight of what he is saying. When a Vorath battle captain steps back from the command console during an active engagement and gestures another person toward it, they are not yielding command in the human sense of the word. They are performing a formal recognition. They are saying that the person they are gesturing toward is the reason the engagement was won, and that the console belongs to them by right of that fact. He looked at me. He stepped back. He gestured toward the console. I looked at the gesture. I looked at the console. I looked at Rithvor, who had the expression of someone who had reorganized a very large mental structure in a very short time and was currently inspecting the new arrangement to see if it was sound. I just work here, I said. He held my gaze, all four of his eyes, primary and secondary, quiet and steady. Yes, he said, we know. I did not have a response to that. I sat with the absence of a response for a moment longer than I usually sit with anything. The coffee maker was 5 levels down in the logistics bay. I thought about it for a reason I could not entirely explain. Then I went back to the logistics feed and began the post-engagement rebalancing because the ship supply chain was currently arranged in a pattern I had designed for a specific purpose, and that purpose was now complete, and everything needed to be moved back to its functional position before second shift started, and Dale noticed the lights in Deck 6 were doing something unusual again. The work does not stop. You do the work. I do the work. The war logs are public record. This is fleet policy. It exists because transparency is a value the Alliance officially endorses and practically finds inconvenient about 40% of the time, and this was one of those times. And nobody caught it until it was too late. The second engagement logs went wide 14 hours after the Shriven withdrew. I was asleep when it happened, or trying to sleep. 400 came, and I was lying in the dark, listening to the ship breathe, the low sound of circulation systems and distant engine hum that becomes after enough time aboard something close to ordinary, and my personal terminal chimed with a priority notification that I had not configured a priority notification for, which meant someone else had configured it for me, and I had a feeling about what that meant. I sat up. The notification was from Fleet Communications, a data packet the kind they send when a record has been flagged for wide distribution. My service file, Reth Vors 2. Engagement report, Ses Vors. Classification analysis, which he had apparently finalized and submitted during the second engagement without telling me, and the care of supply logs, the full 11 pages. I sat in the dark for a while. Then I made coffee, which was terrible, and I drank it standing up, and I read through the distribution list to see who had received the packet. Every Alliance command structure, every fleet admiral, the Cathari High Data Council, the Vorez War Cabinet, 3 Palasi technical boards, a research division I did not recognize, based somewhere in the outer sectors, whose name translated roughly as the Department of Human Variant Studies, which was a department I had not known existed, and whose existence I found simultaneously unsurprising and deeply irritating. The responses started coming in within 6 hours. I know the shape of them because Ses Vor, who apparently decided that his role in my life was to report significant developments in the universe's understanding of Mara Vas, delivered summaries to me in the logistics bay over the course of 3 days, with the expression of a person who keeps opening a door and finding something larger on the other side than they expected. The Cathari High Data Council issued a formal classification update. The pending error in my threat assessment file was resolved, not with a number, with a new category, which Sesver read to me in the original Cathari with the careful pronunciation of someone reciting something they had memorized because they wanted to get it exactly right. Human Variants, Apex Logistics. The notation below it read, no existing threat matrix applicable. Assessment requires new framework under construction. Sesver told me that creating a new category in the Cathari threat matrix is something that has happened 4 times in recorded history. I drank my coffee. The Voreth War Cabinet sent a dispatch to Rithvor directly. Sesver did not have the full text of it, but Rithvor shared the relevant portion with him. which was 2 sentences. The first said that the War Cabinet had reviewed the engagement records and found them consistent with the highest standards of Voreth tactical excellence. The second said that the title used for their greatest war leaders, a word that Sesver told me I should understand as something closer to a sacred designation than a rank, had been formally suspended, not retired, suspended, held open, waiting. I sat with that information. I put it down. I picked it back up. I put it down again. The Shriven had pulled the Karif data. Sesver found this out through a channel I did not ask him to explain, and he seemed to prefer I not ask. Shriven had gone back through their records of the Karif engagement looking for documentation of my actions. They found nothing, not a low entry, not an incomplete file, nothing. I do not appear anywhere in their combat records from Karif because I was never in a combat position. I was in a supply crate in a storage rack on deck 3. And GT snorts. And GT, and I was in the system logs, and I was in the catering schedule, and I was in 11 pages of itemized inventory data, and the Shriven do not read supply logs. Nobody reads supply logs. That was, Sesver told me, the part that had caused the most significant processing time in every command structure that received the packet, not what I had done, how I had done it. Particular combination of complete invisibility and complete effectiveness that produces an outcome that nobody can trace until they are looking at the result and working backward, and even then the workings are in documents that feel too ordinary to constitute a record of something that mattered. He said that several analysts across multiple species had independently arrived at the same uncomfortable conclusion. Humans, when they are at their most dangerous, look completely unremarkable. This is terrifying, apparently. I found it pretty funny. Not out loud, inside the specific private humor of a person who has spent 6 years being invisible by occupation and turns out to have been invisible by nature as well, and the universe has just now noticed the distinction. The commission offer came on a Thursday. It arrived in my personal communication queue between a supply requisition from Deck 7 and a reminder that my annual equipment certification was due in 3 weeks, right in the middle of ordinary things, which felt appropriate. The official seal of Alliance High Command, 3 paragraphs of formal language I read quickly, and at the bottom a specific designation: Battle Captain, Fleet Level Authority, Command of the Steadfast Reach In, Advisory Capacity to the Alliance, Strategic Planning Board. I read it the way I had read Rethvor's first message. Then I looked at the coffee maker. It sat on its shelf, warm and familiar, making coffee that was still terrible, unchanged by the last 6 years or the last 3 days, or the fact that an empire's worth of military had apparently decided I was something they needed at a level I had never asked to operate at. I thought about Karif. I think about Karif most days. This is not dramatic, it is simply true. It is the furniture in the room I wake up in, the photograph face down on the shelf, the specific sequence in which the system logs went quiet, which I know the way I know my own name because I watched it happen with nowhere to go and nothing to do but watch. I had not wanted to be seen since Karif. Being seen costs something. Responsibility costs something. You take on the shape of something that matters to other people, and then the other people become something that matters to you, and the universe is not careful with things that matter. It takes them in sequences you can predict if you watch closely enough, and there is nothing in any supply log or catering schedule or power reroute that changes that. 300 people came home from Kharif. I know each of them as an inventory. Record meal logs, bunk assignments, medical check-ins I watched there. Records keep updating while 4,000 others went quiet. I do not know their faces. I know their resource signatures. I know they were alive because they used things: fuel for heat, food for continuation, power drawn from a system that I was keeping running from inside a storage rack on deck 3. They came home because I held the shape of the ship in my head and did not let go. That is the work. It has always been the work. I picked up the photograph from my shelf. I looked at it for the first time in a year. Everyone smiling, the base behind them. Me snorts in the far right corner, slightly out of frame, holding a cup of terrible coffee, looking at something outside the photo's edge. I put it back down, face up this time. I opened the commission offer. I typed my acceptance in 2 sentences, because that was all it required. Yes. One condition. The response came back in 40 minutes. Condition approved, please specify. I typed, I choose my own department. 30 minutes this time, approved without qualification. I sat with the blank naming field for a long time. And GT snorts. And GT, not because I did not know what to name it. I knew exactly what to name it. I sat with the blank field because Sesver had taught me without meaning to that naming things incorrectly is a serious matter, and I wanted to be sure. I typed one word: logistics. I submitted the form. I stood up from my terminal and stretched my back, which was still doing the unpleasant thing, and looked around. The logistics bay. Dale Station, empty at this hour. Sesver's console dark, the shelf, the coffee maker warm, humming its low, ordinary hum. The photograph face up. I poured the last cup of terrible coffee from a machine that had been with me since before I could politely discuss, and I drank it standing up, and I thought about 411 people on a ship that was still here. The work does not stop. I know this better than I know anything. You do the work, you do it again when it breaks, you hold the shape of it in your body until someone else can hold it too, and then you hand it forward and you keep going. I set down the empty cup. Sure, okay. Let's go.